Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on biomedical instrumentation. In the previous video, we looked at the respiratory system, or we had a very brief discussion of volumes and capacities of the lungs. In this video, we look at further concepts of gas exchange. We look at the ratio of ventilation to perfusion in the lungs and Henry's law. The ventilation to perfusion ratio essentially illustrates the connection between how much air is available or how much air is entering the alveoli each unit of time, in this case each minute. The volume of air that enters the alveoli in each minute is called ventilation. Ventilation means ventilation, that is amount of air that is entering the alveoli. Remember, ventilator we will see in future weeks is a therapeutic device. Right now we are focusing on diagnostics, measurement and diagnostics. In future weeks, when we focus on therapeutic devices, we will spend some considerable amount of time on ventilators. Recall when this was a critical component. Remember, time that you will never forget in your life perhaps is the COVID time, when everybody was making ventilators. There is a homemade ventilator industry, but still there are some standards for a medical device which you as a biomedical engineer, as a biomedical instrumentation engineer will learn as part of this course. Anyhow, that is a digression. The point is that ventilation means the amount of air or the volume of air that enters the alveoli each minute, per minute. Perfusion is the amount of blood flow that is delivered to the alveoli through the capillaries in each minute. So, amount of blood flow is through the capillaries to the alveoli, how much blood is flowing into the alveoli per minute, per unit time. Consider that there is an anatomical dead space, that is essentially the volume of the alveoli that is consuming some blood, that is the volume that is always there. This is the anatomical dead space of about 150 ml. Talking of dead spaces, I wanted to remind you about the residual volume in the lungs. What is the value of the residual volume in the lungs? This is the amount of air that is present in the lungs even after the person says that they have completely exhaled. How much is that value? We said that in the previous class. If you do not know, find out what it is. Okay. Here we are not looking at that. This is the anatomical dead space volume of blood we are looking at, anatomical dead space. This ratio of ventilation to perfusion essentially speaks about, essentially gives an indication or clue about how efficient the gas exchange system is. The oxygen hemoglobin or the oxygen hemoglobin exchange and the carbon dioxide exchange. How is that happening? This is essentially an indication or a clue of the effectiveness of the coordination between the blood flow system and the air system. Is that such a big deal? The answer is yes, this is a huge deal. As you will soon see what are the various diseases, and we discussed that, you will soon see that this is a huge deal. Which is why I think that it might be time for all of us to take some time and learn how to breathe. When I say this, you are all laughing, because do you even have to learn how to breathe? We all know how to breathe. Turns out that in today's time and age, we have forgotten how to breathe. All of us are just doing very fast breathing. We actually are not exercising the lungs. Do your lungs need exercise? The answer is yes. So, you can try and improve the efficiency of the system, because these are muscles whose compliance you need to keep, you need to keep good amount of compliance, otherwise they become slightly stiff, especially with age that happens. Recall that these are all critical components of health. Never forget this. As many of you who are watching are in your 20s, and you think you don't need exercise or you don't need yoga, I am telling you this is the perfect time to start. Don't ask me if I am doing, I am not doing, I will do, okay. I am good at teaching and preaching, not that much at practicing. Now I will do, take it as a challenge. Okay, going back, ventilation to perfusion ratio is essentially the pulmonary blood flow, which is the blood flow that is happening in the pulmonary system. What is other system? That is a systemic blood flow, is it not? Recall and revise your cardiovascular physiology. Then alveolar ventilation, the amount of air that is, or the volume of air that is ventilating your alveoli. Right? What are the various situations in which your VQ ratio is changing in an abnormal way? One is pulmonary embolism. This is a situation in which ventilation is normal. Air is available in the alveoli to be exchanged, oxygen is available in the alveoli to be exchanged. But there is an embolism that is preventing exchange of gases that is happening. In this case, V is finite, V is non-zero, but Q is approximately 0. Then what happens? Your V by Q ratio will be almost infinite, a very large number. In this case, perfusion does not happen because we are interested in ventilation to perfusion ratio. Perfusion does not happen at all, but ventilation is normal. What this will do? This will prevent oxygenation of the blood. What is the most oxygen hungry organ of your body? The brain. It can only stay alive, the brain tissues can stay alive only for so many minutes without oxygen. So, when V by Q ratio approaches infinity or when Q approaches 0, there is no perfusion. This is a situation where there is just dead space that is there. Ventilation is there. Why are people dying? Oxygen is there. They are not able to perfuse, is it not? They are not able to perfuse that into the bloodstream. That is what is happening. The other is a situation in which airway is obstructed. When will that happen? Cold, that postnasal drip due to allergic rhinitis that I have, or sinusitis, allergic rhinitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, some sort of airway obstruction, cold, all those things, that is some things that are obstructing the air. Maybe actually sometimes food particles also obstruct air that is going in, airway obstruction. In this case what happens is ventilation is reduced. Perfusion is, the alveolar system is perfect in exchanging, in the gas exchange, but ventilation, the amount of air that is available to be exchanged, the amount of oxygen that is available to be exchanged is minimal or reduced. So, V by Q ratio almost goes to 0. In this case, no ventilation is present. This is what happens, or this is what used to happen with the COVID situation, is it not? Of course, it is more complicated to this. I am obviously oversimplifying it. It's no ventilation, but the perfusion is normal. This is the airway obstruction situation. The other is the COPD, asthma situation. Similar. In this case, V is very low and Q is normal. In this case, air flow is limited, so gas exchange is not efficient or effective. Then the other situation is pulmonary fibrosis. In this case, what happens is V by Q ratio may be normal or may be reduced, but the most important thing is that the membrane is thickened. When will this happen? Smoking, pollution, all these things. Remember, your system is extraordinarily resilient. Your respiratory system is extraordinarily resilient in avoiding dust and smoke. How? Because there are 23 branches from your trachea. There are 23 branches that it takes. At each stage there is filtering and mucus that is going to pump out unwanted dust, unwanted things. Despite that we get allergy, despite that we get cold. No, your system is designed to be resilient, but if you smoke, whose problem is that? Right? Pulmonary fibrosis essentially causes thickening of the membrane, compliance is lost, this affects both, because V by Q is a ratio. If both ventilation and perfusion are affected, V by Q ratio might still be constant. That does not mean that it is normal. Okay, that is the other situation. Then Henry's law. This law states in this context of respiration, essentially the amount of gas dissolved in a liquid is proportional to the partial pressure of that gas at a given temperature, at a constant temperature. So, the amount of gas that is dissolved in blood, the amount of oxygen that is dissolved in blood is proportional to the partial pressure of oxygen in blood. Now, consider in deoxygenated blood, in venous blood that is entering the pulmonary circulation, that is coming near the alveoli, the partial pressure of oxygen in that blood is much lower than the partial pressure of oxygen that is found in general air. Only because of this, oxygen diffuses through the alveoli. It is not magic, it is not rocket science. It is a simple diffusion that happens because the partial pressure of oxygen in air is higher than the partial pressure of oxygen in deoxygenated blood, not in oxygenated blood, in deoxygenated blood. So, the amount of gas that is dissolved in blood, amount of oxygen that is dissolved in blood is proportional to the partial pressure of that blood, right. So, the concentration of the gas, this oxygen in blood for example, is a function of the solubility constant times the partial pressure, which also indicates that K, is it the same between carbon dioxide and oxygen? The answer is no. It turns out that carbon dioxide dissolves more freely in blood than oxygen. The solubility constant is different. Okay. So, fundamentally the nature of blood is such that, okay. Check this, am I right? Check this. Okay. So, the amount of hemoglobin, of course the amount of hemoglobin matters because the amount of hemoglobin will determine how much oxygen can it mix. So, the amount of hemoglobin and or the level at which oxygen saturates in hemoglobin and the partial pressure essentially keeps increasing until about 80%, until about 80 partial pressure of oxygen, after which it essentially plateaus. This is true in both fetus and in adults, right. This is the oxygen dissociation curve. What does it tell us? This again, you know, if you at different pH values, essentially a variant of the previous this. So, the pressure of oxygen in blood, right, at various pH values there is a shift that happens due to that at various hemoglobin saturation levels. So, if you shift to the right, that essentially increases the number of hydrogen ions, increase carbon dioxide, increase temperature and the BPG, right. So, that is essentially the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. It discusses the partial pressure of the oxygen and the saturation of the hemoglobin. It is of course an S-shaped curve because of the nature of cooperative binding of oxygen to hemoglobin, and it plateaus above 60 millimeter mercury when pressure of oxygen is above 60 millimeter mercury. This is optimal for oxygen, this is optimal for intake of oxygen inside the lungs, and usually there is a steep gradient in these values. No, in these values between 20 to 40 millimeter mercury, there is a relatively steep gradient of this dissociation curve that happens, a quick release that happens, right. It essentially assists the tissues in receiving or getting oxygen. What is the big deal about oxygen? All cells need oxygen for survival. So, blood flow essentially takes oxygen and nutrients. So, all cells need oxygen for survival, not just the lungs, all cells need. With this, we come to the end of this video. In this video, we looked at the ratio of ventilation to perfusion, V by Q or Q by V ratio, and the Henry's law. What is the Henry's law? There is a law that speaks about the amount of gas that can dissolve in a liquid is essentially a function of the partial pressure of that gas, right. With this we come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for your attention.